These days, you hear a lot of young people saying things like Christianity is a Western religion. That is a religion that was invented by the Western people or by the white man to deceive and exploit the African people. There's a whole new movement that is rising on the horizon of Africa that has its premises on this theory. Today, many people approach this topic with a preconceived mindset, and that means that we don't look at the data, we just make sentimental statements. But today I want us to look at the data and really ask ourselves this question without being biased or showing any form of prejudice: is Christianity a Western religion or is not? My name is Oxford, and welcome to the Today's Christian Show. Let's go straight into it. So for the purpose of this video, I would have to explain what the West in this context means. The West is an adverb that was actually used to describe European countries and America as well, and Australia and New Zealand. But over the years, the word has evolved to have a cultural meaning as well. So for example, countries that embrace some social ideologies like capitalism, individualism, humanism, freedom of speech, rational thinking, modern science are termed as Western countries. So you can have a country that sits on the European continent but might not be described or identified as a Western country because it does not embrace some of these social reforms. A clear example is a country like Russia. Russia is a transcontinental country. It sits on the European country and it sits on the European continent as well as the Asian continent. But Russia is not identified as a Western country because it does not embrace some of these social reforms. So now that we are clear, let us go straight to the point. Now, first of all, we would have to look at the origin of Christianity or where it began from. Christianity stems out of Judaism. Now, Judaism is the official religion of the Jews or the people of Israel. And the father of Judaism is a man called Abraham. He lived some 2,000 years before Jesus Christ was born in a place called the Ur of the Chaldeans in ancient Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq. Now, God appears to Abraham, tells him to leave his father's house and to come to a place where he will show him. He eventually leaves with his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot, and they come to the land of Canaan. Abraham gives birth to Isaac. Isaac gives birth to Jacob. Jacob encounters God. God changes his name from Jacob to Israel. Israel gives birth to 12 sons, which we know as the 12 patriarchs, and eventually becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. The whole family of Israel moves and comes to stay in Egypt. Eventually, a new Pharaoh comes who doesn't know them and makes them slave. Some 430 years later, God calls Moses into the scene to come and deliver the people of Israel from Egypt into the promised land, which is Canaan. Now, you do realize that this whole story is set in the East. It revolves around Asia, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. There is no mention of any Western country. Most of the stories in the Old Testament were set in the East. The first time that a Western country was mentioned in the Old Testament is 2 Chronicles chapter 9. The Bible says that Solomon the king used to send ships to Tarshish that would bring him gold and ivory. Now, Tarshish was a city that is in modern day Spain. That was the first time that a Western country was mentioned in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, that is. Secondly, Jesus, the founder himself, was a Jew. He was born and raised in Israel, in the Middle East, not in the West. Jesus looked like the people of his days. He dressed like the people of his day. He acted like the people of his day. He was one of them. Though he was full God, he was full man as well. Now, there is no record that Jesus was white. Jesus didn't have blonde hair or blue eyes, and Jesus wasn't about 7 feet tall. If Jesus was human being as we know he was, then probably he looked like the people in those days. And from the archaeological and historical data, the people that lived in those days were not white people, they were dark people. So Jesus was probably dark, not black like I am, but dark like the people of those days, like how the Middle East people look. He was probably dark with dark hair, dark eyes, probably about 5 feet tall because they weren't very tall people. If Jesus was blonde and probably with blue eyes, I'm pretty sure that the gospel writers would have included that in the gospel because that itself would be a miracle. But Jesus was not white. Thirdly, we have to understand that the reason why Jesus is portrayed as white, or many people think that Jesus is white, is because of the pictures and the paints that we have of Jesus. Now we have to understand that those paints were made by Europeans, and some of the old paintings that we have of Jesus were around the Renaissance period, which is between the 14th century and the 17th century, where classical art, philosophy, and modern science were at its peak, and people like Michelangelo, Da Vinci, William Shakespeare thrived. So, of course, when the European man is painting Jesus, he will be a bit biased towards himself and make Jesus look like white. But all the archaeological data that we have shows that Jesus was not white. He was probably dark with a dark hair. So Jesus was born and raised in the East. His ministry was in the East. He did everything like the Eastern people did it. So Jesus was not a white man. Also, we also have to understand that the early disciples of Jesus were also from Israel, and they were also Eastern people. The early fathers of the church were from the East. The church itself was established and formed in the East before it started migrating into the other parts of the world. The 12 apostles were from the East. People like Apostle Paul were from the East, although he had some form of exposure with the Western world, but he was a man that was had his training in the East. Now we know that eventually the gospel starts migrating and start moving to the other parts of the world. When we read the book of Acts chapter 18, God now tells Paul and Barnabas to now take the gospel to the Gentiles. So gradually the gospel and the church starts spreading from Jerusalem, where its headquarters was, and then it started moving to the utmost part of the world, and other people start hearing about the gospel. But we have to understand that even before the gospel went into the European continent, especially Rome, which was the center of civilization at that time, Africa had already encountered Jesus and Christianity. As early as in Matthew chapter 2, when Jesus and his family was running away from Herod, it was in Egypt that Jesus and his family went to hide. We also have to understand that when Jesus was carrying the cross to Calvary, a man called Simeon from Cyrene, which is modern day Libya, helped Jesus to take the cross to Calvary. In Acts chapter 8, an Ethiopian eunuch encounters Philip. Philip preaches the gospels to him. He believes, and he's baptized, and he goes back to Ethiopia. And as early as 50 AD, Christianity was already established in Alexandria in Egypt and in Carthage in Tunisia. And by the 5th century, some Ethiopian kingdoms like the Aksumite Empire had already made Christianity their official religion, and the other kingdoms like the Nubian kingdoms also followed some years later. So before Christianity even became dominant in the Western world, the African continent had already played a significant role in it. Now, although Christianity had found its way to enter into the heart of Rome, it was still not accepted as a listed religion. Christians were persecuted every single day and every single time. It was in the year 313 AD that the Emperor Constantine made Christianity a listed religion through the Edict of Milan. And eventually in 380 AD, Christianity was made the official religion of the Roman Empire by the Emperor Theodosius in the Edict of Thessalonica. But before this, Africans and some people from the African continent had played significant role in the propagation of the gospel and in the establishment of the Christian religion on the face of the earth. For example, when you take a man like St. Augustine of Hippo, who many scholars consider as the greatest theologian to ever live after the Apostle Paul, he came from Africa. In modern day Algeria, you have people like Athanasius from Alexandria, who defended the Christian faith against Arianism to make sure that the message of the Trinity was not diluted by Arianism in those days. So we have records and tons of records that the continent of Africa had played significant role in the movement and in the establishment of the Christian religion even before it was accepted and established in the Western world. With all this evidence, it is obvious that Christianity does not start from the West. It wasn't invented by the West, but it actually started from the East. Now, it is fair to say that Christianity has been westernized over the years. Yeah, perhaps maybe it wasn't invented by the white man, but eventually over the years, Christianity has been westernized because the church was mainly established in the West, and then the West played a significant role as well in terms of taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. So yeah, some Western cultures have been mixed with the church, but it does not affect the authenticity of the gospel. You see, you cannot judge a philosophy by its abuse. If you really want to know whether Christianity is true or not, you can't use me as a case study. You have to focus on Jesus. You have to put Jesus in a test tube and test whether what he claims to be, he was who he claimed to be. And I dare you and I challenge you that when you put Jesus in a test tube and weigh him, you will see that truly he is Lord and deserves our worship. And besides, whether Jesus was black, blue, green, or white, it doesn't really matter. The Bible makes it clear that Jesus came to die for all men. And that is why in the book of Revelation, John saw a vision that many people from different tribes, different race, different countries had come together to worship Jesus as Lord. Hey, you may be a white person, you may come from Asia, you may come from Africa, but as long as you believe in Jesus, it doesn't really matter. He can save you because he came to die for you. Whether Jesus was white or black doesn't really affect my faith. He was God. He came down to die for me. That's the most important thing. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to share to somebody. My name is Oxford, and I'll come your way next week. Thank you.